Courtney, that was bloody fantastic.
Thank you.
Let me tell you something, Courtney. Something has changed in you. Trust me, in the time you were on the show last year.
At just 13 years old, a quiet British schoolgirl walked onto the America's Got Talent stage with trembling hands and eyes that carried more fear than hope. The audience didn't expect much. Even the judges, especially Simon Cowell, wore expressions of polite curiosity. But the moment Courtney Hadwin released her first powerful note, the entire studio gasped. Her voice didn't sound like a child's. It sounded like the echo of 1,000 broken hearts, raw and drenched in soul. The applause was thunderous, but it was Simon's reaction that left many speechless. He leaned back, silent, as if caught between disbelief and regret, his composure momentarily broken. For a man infamous for his stone-faced critiques and brutal honesty, that hesitation felt heavier than any words he could have spoken. As the audience erupted, Simon uttered a rare compliment. "You're like a lion." But behind the applause, few noticed the sadness in Courtney's eyes, as though she already understood the cost of what was coming. That performance would change her life forever, launching her into fame with the force of a tidal wave. And yet the girl whose voice shook a nation would soon learn that applause doesn't last forever. What followed was not just a journey to stardom, but a painful unraveling of childhood, identity, and innocence. In that single moment of triumph, a spotlight cast more than light. It cast shadows that would take years to escape. What began with a standing ovation ended with a quiet heartbreak the cameras never caught. But that wasn't the whole story. Long before the world knew her name, Courtney Hadwin was just a shy girl from the former mining village of Hesleden, nestled in the forgotten corners of County Durham. Her childhood was marked not by red carpets or cameras, but by the ordinary rhythm of school bells, muddy shoes, and quiet dreams. Raised by loving parents Paul and Anne-Marie, with siblings Melissa and Paul Jr., Courtney grew up surrounded by modest means but unwavering love. Her voice first emerged not in stadiums but in her bedroom, where she'd sing to herself in whispers, crafting melodies as a secret escape. It was her grandfather who shared the most heartbreaking glimpse into her early sacrifices, revealing that young Courtney took to busking in the streets just to help pay for her singing lessons and family's travel costs. Rain or shine, she stood outside with a hopeful face, her voice competing with the wind, trying to earn enough coins for a chance to chase something bigger. Her raw talent caught the attention of her small town after a lunchtime performance at school. Say Something was posted on Facebook and went locally viral. But even then, her classmates were more surprised than supportive, often failing to grasp how someone so quiet could sing with such aching emotion. That child, still too young to understand contracts or fame, began taking lessons at local institutions like Vocal Ovation and Schottenhall Theatre School, scraping by with whatever she could. She was a child with a gift, yes, but also a burden. Because from the very start, every note she sang was wrapped in sacrifice, and every cheer she received came at the cost of something innocent: her time, her freedom, her childhood. The road to the big stage didn't begin with glitter. It began with hardship, long walks to classes, and the aching feeling that while others her age were playing games, she was already growing up too fast. And what happened next would only deepen that loss. Before America's Got Talent catapulted her into the global spotlight, Courtney Hadwin had already spent years climbing the steep staircase of early fame, brick by brick. Her first televised exposure came through The Voice Kids UK, where at just 12, she stunned judges with a fiery performance of Nutbush City Limits and advanced all the way to the finals. But even there, behind the bright lights and clapping hands, Courtney's eyes carried a heaviness, a quiet understanding that she wasn't just a child singing on TV. She was becoming a product for people to cheer, judge, and expect things from. The pressure only escalated when, in 2018, America's Got Talent producers reached across the ocean to invite her to audition for the show's 13th season. It was an opportunity of a lifetime, but one that would cost her dearly. Stepping onto that massive American stage, Courtney seemed unsure of herself, fidgeting, awkward, even frightened. But then came the first note of Otis Redding's "Hard to Handle," and the world stopped. Her voice ripped through the air like lightning tearing open the sky. Howie Mandel slammed the golden buzzer without hesitation, declaring that she was a voice out of time, raw, untamed, and electric. The comparisons to Janis Joplin weren't just flattery. They were a heavy crown to bear for someone barely into her teens. The performance went viral, viewed over 300 million times, and yet, while the internet celebrated a phenomenon, few asked how she was holding up behind the scenes. The screaming crowds, the endless interviews, the constant attention, all of it began chipping away at her sense of peace. She had gone from a village girl to a global headline in a matter of weeks, but inside, something was beginning to crack. Fame had embraced her tightly, but its grip would soon prove suffocating. Because while the world was celebrating the rise of a star, Courtney was quietly bracing herself for the fall. In the wake of her explosive AGT debut, Courtney Hadwin's path seemed like a fairy tale unfolding at lightning speed. Just months after her viral performance, Simon Cowell, music mogul, global tastemaker, and the man who called her voice a lion's roar, signed her to his label, Psycho Music, in partnership with Arista Records. It should have been the beginning of something magical. Instead, it marked the start of something quietly heartbreaking. At only 14 years old, Courtney wasn't just handed a record contract. She was handed the weight of expectation, the chains of image, and the silence of losing her say. In interviews at the time, she described the moment as a dream come true, glowing with the kind of hope only a teenager can have. But that glow didn't last. Almost immediately, Courtney found herself surrounded not by mentors but by marketers, not by creatives but by executives. She was rushed into studios with unfamiliar producers, expected to craft hit songs on demand, while still trying to understand who she was as a person, let alone as an artist. Her voice, once a raw storm of emotion, was slowly molded into a radio-friendly product. Courtney later shared how she felt people were constantly telling her who to be, what to sing, and how to sound. The label's vision for her was polished and commercial. Her own instincts were gritty and soulful. She was no longer being guided, she was being packaged. Behind the camera flashes and press releases, a young girl was being stretched too thin, too fast. The saddest part? She didn't even know yet that her identity was slipping away. In the rush to make her a star, no one seemed to ask if she was still happy, still connected to the music that brought her here. And as deadlines replaced dreams, and brand meetings replaced bedroom songwriting, the dream that once sparkled began to crack under the harsh glare of manufactured fame. But the real heartbreak had only just begun. Once the ink dried on her contract, Courtney Hadwin's world turned into a high-speed blur of flights, studio lights, and boardroom expectations. On paper, she was living the dream, but in reality, she was navigating a nightmare disguised as opportunity. At 14, most kids are worried about homework and social circles. Courtney, meanwhile, was jetting between continents, pressured to record chart-ready singles with strangers who saw her less as a person and more as a product to refine. Each day brought another calendar full of co-writing sessions, industry meetings, and photo shoots. The spontaneity and joy of music, the soul that had once poured freely from her lungs, were slowly replaced with synthetic beats and commercial hooks she didn't believe in. She confided in interviews that she often felt like a character, directed and shaped to fit an image. Her voice, praised for its grit and rawness, was now being polished into something smoother, radio-safe, and distant from her own reflection. The irony was cruel. She had been signed for her uniqueness, only to be slowly erased by the very system that praised her. Behind the camera, her exhaustion deepened. She was constantly told to smile, perform, deliver. But inside, a quiet storm brewed. Sadness crept into her voice during interviews as she hinted at losing control over her music, her time, even her sense of self. She wasn't just tired, she was unraveling. Fans still cheered, critics still raved, but the girl at the center of it all was beginning to fade. One of her songs, later teased in a rare post, bore the lyric, "You only want me when I'm smiling." It wasn't just a line, it was a cry for help. Beneath the headlines and behind the viral views was a teenager being pulled apart by an industry that demanded more than she could give. And as Courtney began to quietly withdraw from the spotlight, the warning signs were there. But nobody looked closely enough. What happened next would shatter the illusion of fame entirely. It didn't happen with a bang, it happened with a whisper. One day, Courtney Hadwin's social media updates slowed to a trickle. Then her interviews stopped. Her public appearances vanished. And just like that, the girl once hailed as the next Janis Joplin seemed to disappear into thin air. Fans were left confused, heartbroken, and desperate for answers. Rumors swirled like a storm. Had she suffered a breakdown? Was she unwell? Had something tragic happened behind the scenes? But the industry, once so eager to plaster her face across every screen, now responded with silence. No press releases, no official updates, just a gaping absence where a star once stood. For Courtney, this retreat was not a publicity stunt. It was survival. She had given everything, her voice, her time, her innocence, to a machine that chewed up teenage dreams and spit out chart metrics. Behind the scenes, she was drowning in loneliness, shuttled between studios and hotel rooms, far from home, family, and anything that made her feel real. She later hinted in interviews that she felt like she was vanishing in plain sight, no longer recognized by the people around her or even by herself. She stopped posting not because she didn't care, but because it hurt too much to pretend. And as fans begged for new music, her silence screamed louder than any song. The media, in its usual cold efficiency, began speculating wildly. Accidents, illnesses, secret firings. But the truth was simpler and sadder. Courtney was just a young girl crushed under the weight of expectation, trying to put herself back, together in the dark. One of her unreleased lyrics, "You only want me when I'm smiling," resurfaced and spread like wildfire, a gut punch to anyone who ever claimed to love her talent without considering her pain. While the industry moved on to the next viral act, Courtney was left alone with the scars of her own success. And what little was left of that bright, wide-eyed girl who once shook the world with a song was now hiding in silence, nursing wounds the world refused to see. As Courtney faded from the spotlight, one figure loomed in the background, eerily silent: Simon Cowell. The man who had once called her a lion, who signed her to his powerful label, was now nowhere to be found. There were no public check-ins, no words of support, no efforts to shield the child star he had helped elevate. For fans, the absence felt like abandonment. For Courtney, it felt like confirmation. She was never truly being mentored, only managed. Their bond, once painted as a blossoming partnership, turned out to be a business transaction cloaked in sentiment. While Courtney struggled with identity loss, creative suffocation, and emotional exhaustion, Simon had already moved on. To new seasons, new stars, new headlines. The connection that once felt personal was exposed for what it was, fleeting and conditional. And yet Courtney never lashed out. She never aired her bitterness, though many speculated she had every reason to. After all, it was Simon's name that legitimized her contract. It was his empire that promised to nurture her, and then quietly disappeared when the fame turned heavy. Years passed with no direct comment from him about her decline, no acknowledgement of the machine's failure to protect her. Then, almost like a ghost story whispered through grainy clips, rumors emerged of Simon breaking his silence in a rare moment of reflection. In one supposed off-camera interview, he allegedly paused, sighed deeply, and admitted, "We expected too much, too soon. She was a kid. I think we failed her." Whether or not those words were ever truly spoken didn't matter. The pain they described was very real. Courtney had been molded, praised, and paraded before she could even drive a car, then left to cope with the fallout alone. The industry never asked what she needed. It only demanded what she could give. And as Simon continued his rise on television, the girl he once called brilliant was quietly rebuilding herself in his absence. The mentor vanished. The silence remained, and Courtney had to find her way forward without the man who once called her a phenomenon. After years of deafening silence and painful self-reflection, Courtney Hadwin returned, not as a viral sensation or teenage starlet, but as a scarred survivor reclaiming her voice on her own terms. By 2025, she had quietly parted ways with the label that once promised her the world, severing ties with an industry machine that valued her numbers more than her soul. What emerged from that break wasn't a rebrand, it was a rebirth. No longer tethered to a contract or a prepackaged image, Courtney resurfaced as an independent artist with something far more valuable than fame: control. Partnering with Grammy-winning producer Kevin Bowe, known for his work with raw, emotionally charged legends like Etta James and Joe Cocker, Courtney began recording music that finally felt like her. No more writing camps, no more industry, molds, no more pretending. Her new singles like Monsters, You Only Love Me When I Lie, and That Girl Don't Live Here weren't just songs. They were confessions wrapped in melody, defiant and tender all at once. Critics described them as thunderous, fearless, and achingly honest. Gone was the pop gloss of her label days. In its place stood stripped-down arrangements, gritty vocals, and lyrics that bled with emotional truth. One track, Breakable, struck a particular chord with fans. It was a chilling reminder of how fragile the human soul can become when pushed too hard, too fast. Courtney herself described this new chapter as a personal awakening, a space where she finally felt free to sing for herself, not for charts. In interviews, her words carried both sadness and strength. Everyone used to tell me who I should be. Now I know who I am. That quiet defiance, so different from the firecracker girl who once screamed into the AGT microphone, felt even more powerful. It wasn't a comeback fueled by spectacle, it was a quiet revolution. And as the world listened with fresh ears, Courtney wasn't asking to be liked anymore. She was demanding to be understood. Beneath every chord and chorus of Courtney Hadwin's new music lies a silent scream, a desperate echo of the girl who once stood under confetti showers, lost in a spotlight too bright to bear. Her latest songs aren't radio-friendly anthems. They're raw pages from a diary long kept shut, where each lyric peels back the layers of a heartbreak the world never took the time to see. In You Only Love Me When I Lie, Courtney confronts the brutal truth behind her years in the industry. The pressure to smile, to perform, to be palatable even when she was unraveling inside. Critics called the track a blues soul dagger, and fans flooded the comments with tears and confessions of their own. In Monsters, she paints a haunting portrait of fame's darker side, not the glitz, but the quiet devouring of innocence. Lines about being seen but not heard, celebrated but never known, echo the sorrow of a childhood traded for applause. Her voice, still thunderous and coarse, now trembles with controlled rage, no longer just powerful, but profoundly pained. That Girl Don't Live Here carries the heaviest ache of all, a farewell to the version of herself that was cheered into oblivion. These aren't just songs, they are reclamations of identity from the ashes of exploitation. Each verse drips with melancholy, not just from the words themselves, but from what they imply. Courtney was never asked how she felt. She was only ever told what to do. And now, years later, the music finally answers all the questions the world failed to ask. Why did she disappear? What happened behind the curtain? Why did her spark flicker out when it was burning so bright? It's all there. Not in press releases or social media captions, but in harmonies that ache and lyrics that bleed. The world once demanded her shine, but now she sings in shadow, raw, unfiltered, and heartbreaking. And in doing so, she's found something far more lasting than fame: the power to tell the truth no matter how sad or uncomfortable it may be. As the final chords of Courtney Hadwin's latest music fade into silence, we are left not with applause, but with a haunting question. Did the industry shape her into a star, or did it slowly dismantle a teenage girl in front of the world's eyes? Her story is not one of failure, but of betrayal, disguised as opportunity. Of dreams that came true only to turn into quiet nightmares. She was discovered for her rawness, signed for her fire, and celebrated for her difference. But once inside the machine, that very difference was treated like a problem to be fixed. Producers told her what to wear, how to sound, what to feel. Executives ignored her discomfort, branding her with comparisons to legends before she had even figured out who she was. Even Simon Cowell, the man who first championed her, eventually became a distant figure, a symbol of a promise unfulfilled. If the whispers of his regret are true, then perhaps he too felt the quiet sting of watching a gift slip through the cracks. "We expected too much too soon," he allegedly confessed. And yet that truth came too late. Courtney had already paid the price. Her voice bent under pressure, her identity blurred in a sea of manufactured perfection. But what the industry tried to control, she later reclaimed. By walking away from the noise, by stepping into the darkness, she found the only light that truly mattered, her own. Now, her songs don't ask for validation, they demand reflection. They force listeners to look past the viral moment and into the tragedy that followed. And maybe that's where her true power lies. Not in the records sold or the fame regained, but in the courage to stand on her own terms, scarred but standing. Courtney Hadwin is no longer the wide-eyed girl who stunned Simon Cowell into silence. She is the voice that survived him, the echo that refused to fade, and the living proof that sometimes the greatest comeback isn't about reclaiming the stage, it's about reclaiming yourself.